rain hammered the tin roof of the train station like gunfire, and Clara Bennett gripped her daughter's small hand tighter as the crowd surged toward the last dry bench in the building. Emma stumbled. Clara caught her, pulled her upright, and wedged them both onto the narrow seat, just as a man in a soaked wool coat shouldered his way through the crush of bodies, eyes scanning the room for anywhere to sit. Every bench was full. Every face turned away, except one. He stopped in front of Clara and Emma, water dripping from the brim of his hat onto the floorboards, and for a moment he simply stood there, as if asking for anything at all had become difficult for him. Then he spoke. "Can I sit with you?" Clara looked up at him, really looked, and something in his exhausted, guarded face made her scoot closer to Emma without hesitation. "Of course," she said. He sat. This is the story of a wealthy widower and a single mom, sitting side by side in a rainstorm, already tangled in each other's lives. He asked her a simple question, never knowing she'd been helping him for months. So how did two total strangers end up here, already carrying each other's secrets without ever having spoken? Stay with me, because the answer is one of the most quietly powerful love stories you'll hear all year. And trust me, you do not want to miss how it ends. If stories like this move you, hit that subscribe button right now and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Let's get into it. 3 months earlier, Elias Carter was a man who had built an empire out of cattle, land, and silence. 48 years old, owner of the largest ranch in the county, respected by everyone and known by almost no one. 2 years had passed since he buried his wife, Margaret, and in that time, he had slowly disappeared into his own house. He ate alone. He worked alone. Every Sunday, without fail, he rode out to the small cemetery on the edge of town, knelt at her grave, and said nothing at all, because there was nothing left to say. He never noticed that after he left each week, someone else came. Clara Bennett was 31, a widow herself, raising her 8-year-old daughter Emma on whatever she could earn from sewing, baking, laundry, and cleaning other people's homes. Her cottage was small and drafty, her hands were rough from work, and her days were full before the sun even rose. As a single mom with no one to lean on, she had every reason to keep her head down and her energy for herself. But somehow, every single Sunday afternoon, she found time to walk to the cemetery, pull the weeds from a stranger's grave, water the flowers, straighten the small wooden cross, and leave a handful of fresh wildflowers she couldn't really afford to pick instead of sell. She never did it to be noticed. She did it because she couldn't walk past suffering and pretend she hadn't seen it. And so, without either of them realizing it, Clara began quietly rewriting the story of a man she had never even met. It started small. Elias lost a leather glove on Main Street one bitter morning, and it appeared on his porch 2 days later, cleaned and folded, with no note. His coat tore at the tailor's shop, and when he went to collect it, it had already been mended, paid in full, by someone the tailor refused to name. When one of his elderly ranch hands fell ill and couldn't afford medicine, it simply showed up at his door. When a storm ripped through the northern fence line, half the town turned out to repair it before Elias even finished writing letters asking for help. He began to believe there was some invisible network of kindness moving through the town on his behalf, and it unsettled him almost as much as it moved him. He pressed the tailor for a name and got only a shrug. He pressed the pharmacist and got the same. He rode out to the cemetery and asked the old caretaker outright. Surely he knew who kept leaving flowers on the graves nearby. And even the caretaker just shook his head, saying folks came and went all the time, and he never made it his business to ask. It never once crossed Elias's mind that it could be one person, one tired, overworked widow with a little girl on her hip. Emma, meanwhile, had started noticing the sad cowboy who wandered through town looking like he was carrying something heavy no one else could see. Why does he always look like that? Emma asked her mother one afternoon, tugging on her sleeve outside the general store. Emma, that's not polite, Clara said gently, though she couldn't quite hide her smile. But why, though? Because grown-ups carry things you can't always see, Clara said. Now hush. Emma didn't hush. Emma never really hushed, and that, more than anything, was what finally broke through Elias Carter's armor. Back at the train station, in the rain, Emma turned to the stranger sitting beside her mother and asked without any hesitation at all, "Are you the sad cowboy?" Clara nearly choked. Emma. But Elias, for the first time in longer than he could remember, laughed. A real laugh from somewhere deep in his chest, the kind that surprised even him. "I suppose I am," he said, looking at the little girl like she'd just solved a puzzle he'd been stuck on for years. Emma grinned, satisfied, and launched into a stream of questions about his horse, his ranch, whether cowboys were scared of snakes, and why he never smiled at anyone in town. Clara apologized over and over, mortified, but Elias just kept answering every single question, like it mattered. Because somehow, sitting there soaked and cold with a little girl grilling him and her mother blushing beside him, it was the first time in 2 years he hadn't felt entirely alone. That should have been the end of one chance encounter. Instead, it was only the beginning. Their paths kept crossing after that. At the farmer's market, at the church picnic, at the general store, at the library, at a charity dinner neither of them particularly wanted to attend. Neither one arranged it. Neither one dared to. But somehow, every week, they ended up in the same place at the same time, and neither of them minded nearly as much as they should have. One afternoon, Elias found Emma crying over an injured puppy she'd found limping near the creek, and without a second thought, he knelt in the mud in his good trousers and helped her carry it home, splinting its leg himself with more gentleness than half the town thought a man like him possessed. "You're not so sad after all," Emma told him solemnly, watching him wrap the splint. "Maybe not today," Elias admitted. A week later, Clara learned from the housekeeper that Elias had been skipping meals again, too buried in work and grief to bother cooking for himself, so she started sending over extra pie, by mistake, insisting she'd simply made too much. He knew it wasn't a mistake. He ate it anyway, and left the dish on her porch scrubbed clean. Not long after that, Clara's porch step, the one that had been rotting for a year because she couldn't afford lumber, was suddenly fixed overnight. New wood, sturdy nails, sanded smooth. No note, no name. But she knew. And every single Sunday, without being asked, Emma began saving him a seat at church, patting the space beside her like it had always belonged to him. Piece by piece, without either of them announcing it, Elias Carter was coming back to life. He smiled more. He slept better. He caught himself, more than once, looking forward to Sunday for the first time since he'd buried his wife. Of course, a town like theirs couldn't watch a wealthy widower grow close to a poor single mom without talking about it. And talk they did. "She's after his money. Mark my words," one woman muttered at the market, just loud enough for Clara to hear as she walked past with a basket of mending. "Poor Margaret isn't even cold in the ground, and he's already parading around with some seamstress," another whispered after church, not caring who noticed. It got worse before it got better. A woman at the general store asked Clara, right to her face, whether she'd planned this from the start, and when Clara tried to explain, the woman only smirked and said, "That's exactly what a woman after his fortune would say." Clara held her chin up in public and said nothing, but that night, alone with Emma asleep beside her, she finally let herself cry, quietly, into a pillow, so her daughter wouldn't hear. Elias heard the same whispers at his own table, from men who'd known him 20 years, and suddenly felt entitled to warn him about gold-digging widows. He said nothing to them either, but it hurt more than he let on. And slowly, quietly, both of them began pulling back from each other, each one afraid of becoming the town's next scandal, each one certain that pulling away was the kinder thing to do for the other. Neither of them knew yet that the truth was about to come out anyway, and it was going to be far bigger than anyone in that town could have guessed. If you're enjoying this story so far, make sure to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next, because it's about to get a lot more emotional. The truth came out on an ordinary Sunday, the kind Elias had lived through hundreds of times before. He rode to the cemetery, knelt at Margaret's grave, and for once, instead of simply sitting in silence, he thanked the old caretaker for keeping the flowers so beautifully tended all these years. The caretaker frowned, confused. "Son," he said slowly, "I've never touched those flowers. Never laid a hand on that cross either. Someone else has been coming here every week for months. Young woman, little girl with her sometimes." Elias felt the ground shift beneath him. He started asking questions he should have asked long ago, quietly, carefully, piecing together everything that had happened over the last several months. The tailor finally admitted, with a guilty look, that it had been Clara who paid for his coat. The pharmacist confirmed, reluctantly, that she was the one who'd covered the ranch hand's medicine. The neighbors admitted, sheepishly, that it was Clara who had organized the fence repair after the storm, going door to door asking for help on his behalf without ever mentioning her own name. Even his housekeeper, wiping tears from her eyes, revealed that Clara had sat with her for hours the week her husband died, simply so she wouldn't grieve alone. Every act of kindness that had slowly pulled Elias back from the edge of his own grief had come from one exhausted, overworked widow who had never once asked for a single thing in return. He rode straight to her cottage that evening, heart pounding in a way it hadn't in years, and when she opened the door, he asked her the only question that mattered. Why? Clara stood there for a long moment, wiping flour from her hands onto her apron, unsure how much he already knew. Because grief shouldn't be faced alone, she finally said quietly. "I wasn't helping a wealthy rancher, Elias. I was helping a man who missed his wife." Elias didn't have words for a long moment. He simply stood on her doorstep, stunned, staring at a woman who had rebuilt his life piece by piece and never once wanted credit for it. "You should have told me," he said finally, his voice rough. "Would it have mattered?" she asked. "You'd have thanked me, maybe felt indebted. I didn't want that. I just wanted you to stop being so alone." But the town's whispers only grew louder once word got around about what Clara had done, twisting even her kindness into something suspicious. "She's been sneaking around for months," people muttered. "Working her way into his life. Bet she planned this from the start." Someone even suggested she'd been auditioning for the role of his wife the whole time. It was too much. Clara couldn't bear the thought of anyone believing her compassion had been a calculated scheme for money, so she pulled away completely. She stopped visiting the cemetery. She declined every invitation. She avoided Main Street entirely, taking the long way around town just to keep from running into Elias. She even began quietly asking about sewing work in the next county, wondering if it might be easier to simply start over somewhere. No one whispered behind her back. Emma didn't understand why her mother suddenly looked so sad all the time, or why they never saw the sad cowboy anymore. "Did we do something wrong?" Emma asked one night, and Clara had no honest answer that wouldn't break her daughter's heart a little. Elias, for his part, refused to let it end there. The Harvest Festival came just weeks later. The whole town gathered in the square for food, music, and dancing, and Elias walked straight into the middle of it, interrupting the celebration entirely. The fiddler stopped mid-note. The crowd fell silent as he climbed onto a wagon bed so everyone could see and hear him. "For months," he said, his voice carrying across the square. "Some of you have spread rumors about a woman in this town. You've called her a schemer, a gold digger, a woman chasing a rich man's fortune." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Someone near the back started to protest, and Elias raised a hand. "I'd like to correct the record," he said, before another word of it spreads. One by one, he told them everything. The glove, the coat, the medicine, the fence, the meals sent to lonely ranch hands, the hours spent comforting a grieving housekeeper, the years, no, the months, of quiet visits to his late wife's grave that no one had ever asked her to make. He watched the crowd's expressions shift from confusion to shame, as they realized just how badly they'd misjudged the woman standing frozen at the edge of the square, Emma's hand clutched tightly in her own. "She never once asked me for anything," Elias said. "Not money, not thanks, not even my name half the time. And you repaid her kindness with cruelty." The square was dead silent now. A few of the loudest gossips looked down at their own boots. Elias stepped down from the wagon and walked straight to Clara, ignoring every eye on him. "Money built my ranch," he said, loud enough for the whole town to hear. "But kindness rebuilt my life." He took her hands in his. "The first thing I ever asked you was, 'Can I sit with you?'" he said, his voice softening. "Today, I'm asking something far greater." He glanced at Emma, who was watching with wide, hopeful eyes, then back to Clara. "Would you let Emma and me spend the rest of our lives beside you?" Clara, tears streaming down her face, could barely get the word out. "Yes." The square erupted in applause, the same people who had whispered cruel rumors now cheering loud enough to shake the trees, ashamed and grateful all at once to witness something so pure. Even the woman from the general store found herself clapping, wiping her own eyes. Several months later, Clara and Emma moved into the ranch house that had felt empty for so long. Elias became the kind of father to Emma that she'd never had, patient and steady, letting her ride beside him on his horse every chance she got. Together, he and Clara built a community kitchen for families, struggling the way she once had, and a memorial garden at the cemetery, honoring both Margaret and Clara's late husband, turning a place that had once held nothing but grief into a symbol of hope for the entire town. The whispers stopped, not because the town forgot, but because they finally understood. On a quiet evening, the two of them sat together on the porch as the sun sank low over the fields, Emma laughing somewhere out near the barn, chasing fireflies in the dusk. Clara leaned her head against Elias's shoulder and smiled. "Funny," she said. "You only ever asked if you could sit with me." Elias chuckled, pulling her closer. "Best question I ever asked. If this story touched you, don't scroll away just yet. Hit that like button. Leave a comment telling me which moment hit you the hardest, and subscribe so you never miss the next story like this one. Thank you for watching until the very end.